Hey everyone, hi, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be talking through all of the really great books I've read this year, and I can't wait to share them with you. It's just a wonderful time of year to be encroaching on the halfway mark and to sort of take stock of what has been really wonderful. And to my surprise, I have quite a few books that I want to share with you. So we're gonna get all into that when we get into the meat of the video. But if you're new here and happens to be the first time you are seeing one of my videos, then hi, I'm Shelly. You found me quite randomly, and I'm so glad that you're here. I really love books and reading. You could probably hear my dog in the background. Things are a little chaotic over here. That's sort of par for the course when it comes to one of my videos. But essentially, I really love books and reading, and I'm excited to share some of my favorites from this year so far. If you are not subscribed, I would encourage you to do so. Please like the video if you are enjoying yourself. And without any further rambling on, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. What a great video to film, to take stock of my year so far, to share with you all of the wonderful books that I've read. I didn't really limit myself. I have 13 items to share with you. I have, and they vary in categories. I will leave the categories in the timestamp down below, but these are all favorite reads. I didn't limit myself. The only question I asked myself was, is this a favorite read for the year? And if there was a resounding yes in my heart, then I'm sharing it with you today. For a lack of a better term, in terms of the internet, these are like my 5-star reads this year, even though I don't star rate my books at all. So if you want more of like a shorthand bookish term, then these are my 5-star reads this year. I have read about a little over 40 novels, and if you included volumes of manga, then I have read closer to 70, or if a little over 70 items if you combined manga and books. So in terms of, we'll go manga, nonfiction, we'll go honorable mentions, and they're honorable mentions for a reason. We'll go honorable mentions, manga, nonfiction, and then classics, and then fiction. Okay? Hopefully I fixed that in my mind. Okay.
Honorable mentions, manga, nonfiction, classics, regular fiction, yes.
We are starting with honorable mentions. Now these are honorable mentions partly because these two books are debut works and they read a bit like a debut work, meaning that the story is really good. It just doesn't quite sparkle. In terms of like star ratings, wow, I'm really relying on the star rating language today. These are like 4.5 stars rather than sparkling, incredible 5-star reads. There was just something in the makeup and the storytelling that it just isn't quite there at that level of just being an absolute favorite. But they were so good nonetheless, and I would highly recommend these books to readers in which you're interested in this matter. So the first one is Alice Wynn's In Memoriam. Alice Wynn, this is a great debut by this author because she's telling the story of the friendship and eventual something more of Gaunt and Elwood. These are two men that meet in a boys' boarding school at the precipice of World War I. Actually, World War I is going on, and both have pressure on their own to join for their own reasons. And in a lot of ways, it's about love and lost love and grieving and the perils of World War I. And it is just, at the heart of it, just so spectacular in terms of characters. I loved the characters, and I learned a lot about World War I as I read the book. It was really, really good. And there is this specialness, partly because one of the characters, Elwood, is really into poetry, and he's really into Tennyson's In Memoriam. And so he will randomly quote it. And some of the scenes of World War I that Alice Wynn describes so beautifully connects with the way that Tennyson was mourning his friend, because Tennyson wrote a myriad of poems, which is what In Memoriam is about the loss of a friend and that grief. And so as Elwood is reciting this poetry, it so beautifully is linked with the loss that our main characters are feeling, because so many young men around them, their friends, their colleagues, the people that they've just known in passing, they're dying, because there were so many men lost in World War I. And it was really interesting. It took some twists and turns that I didn't quite expect, which was wonderful, and just a phenomenal read. The next book is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. Now this tells the story of Agnes. This story is set in Iceland in 1829, and we're following Agnes, who is a convicted murderer waiting for her execution, and she moves in with this family as she's waiting for her execution date. And slowly you find out why she was convicted of murder, and you get her side of the story. It was dark and atmospheric and really moody, and really matched the story that Kent was telling. And the marriage of both the atmosphere and the mood of the book, telling this story about this murderer who is so much more complex and interesting than I would have ever thought. It was just such a perfect marriage, and I'm actually quite curious as to what Kent has written since. If I can remember my own ordering, I said honorable mentions, then manga. So in terms of manga, there are two standout stories so far. One of which I have continued to read and make videos on, and that is One Piece by Eiichiro Oda. Now, what's so great about One Piece is that it is goofy and serious. There is a really lovely marriage between the silly and the serious. There's a wonderful balance. It is in so many ways ridiculous and fantastical and out of the realm of anything that we would call real life. It is definitely in a world of its own, and the world building, speaking of the world building is wonderful. However, the most wonderful thing, I think, are the characters and the way the characters interact. A while back, I pinned down that it feels very Calvin and Hobbes by Bill Watterson. It feels like the humor of Calvin and Hobbes. Silly, funny, serious, philosophical, and in a lot of ways, just it stands on its own. It's this really interesting over 1,000 chapter piece work, this serialization, and it is so fun. It's so fun to read. It's so fun to dig into, and I've really enjoyed myself with One Piece. The other standout manga that I actually sadly haven't picked up in a while, partly because of just time, honestly time, and the amount that I just, honestly, it's just time, priorities and time. But it is Spy Family, and I forget who it's written by. I'll make sure that I have the author included in the notes down below. But Spy Family follows this family in which the father is a spy, the mother is an assassin, and the daughter is a telepath. And right, so she can read people's minds, and they all don't know what the other person can do, except for the little girl, but it's from a little girl's perspective. So she knows that her father, had pew pew, like he wields weapons and kills people, but she also knows that her mother is not all that she seems, and they're building this fake family, and it's all goofy, silly, and totally outlandish, but in the best way. It's so cute, and the character design is impeccable. It's one that I think about coming back to often. I just haven't quite taken the plunge to go back in, even though I really, really enjoyed what I read of Spy Family. All right, nonfiction. I definitely have a runner-up and a favorite in this category, and the runner-up is After the Romanovs by Helen Rapaport. This tells about the Belle Epoque era in Paris, when a lot of Russians were fleeing Russia after the Russian Revolution or during the Russian Revolution, and they take refuge in Paris. and what it was like for a lot of those individuals, and how these individuals come from or have access to great wealth, and the way that a lot of these individuals eventually sort of squander their wealth or spend their wealth, and what happens to them. And it's kind of niche, if you think about it. But if you're interested in Russia, or if you're interested in the Belle Epoque era, this has this, especially the beginning of this book, that talks about the Belle Epoque era, and then goes through and kind of moves on to the years that follow that era. It just in what happened to Russia and Russians, and how they took refuge in Paris. It was really interesting. It was really, really interesting, especially since Rappaport follows some key individuals who were exiled from Russia and end up having their own salons and their own their company people. I mean, it was so interesting. It was so interesting. Just this blend of wealth and history and art, and the things that sprung from this really interesting precipice in history. So if that sounds interesting to you, this is a wonderful read, and it's not super, super long. The next one, which is my favorite nonfiction that I've read this year, and it was cast by Isabel Wilkerson, or it is cast by Isabel Wilkerson. This talks about, I think everyone and their mother has read Cast at this point. However, if you haven't and you're wanting a little synopsis, it is Isabel Wilkerson's, she sets out to prove, or to, her thesis, in a sense, is that there is an invisible caste system that we do not acknowledge in the United States, but that is playing out very, very prominently in all of our lives. And through that, she meditates and writes about, and is having a conversation with both history. She thinks about the Nazis. She thinks about the caste system in India, and she compares it to the caste system in the US. And she makes a compelling and heartbreaking argument, one that I think about and that sticks with me even today. I've thought about situations in my own life and in the things that I'm interested in, like the beauty industry, that further exemplifies the fact that we do have a caste system here. And ultimately, she just she says, like, here's this new lens to look at the world, and let me show you. And then now it's like I have this new clear focus on how to think about some situations. And it's very applicable and really interesting, if not heavy and sad in a lot of ways, that we haven't grown as much as we should have in this country. But really compelling and interesting writing. All right, I have two classics for you. I think that they both are sort of tied in my heart for a really wonderful read. The first one is going to be Catherine by Anya Seton. This tells the story of Catherine and her love story with the Duke of Lancaster during the Plantagenet Plantagenet era in British history. And so we meet Catherine, who is young and naive, who is coming to the English court, the court where she's going to be interacting with people with more experience and political finesse than she does. And we watch her as she, struggles through and meets her love interest, and the things that pull them apart and the things that bring them together, the situations rather that pull them apart and the situations that bring them together, and the blooming of their love. And what I thought was so interesting is that this is not just a coming of age story in the sense that you watch her grow up and change, but this is really, in a lot of ways, like her spiritual and emotional awakening to, I don't know, her circumstances and her life, and the way that she's lied to herself, and penance for the things that she feels like she did wrong in her life, and having really deep desires and watching them come to fruition. And the way that Anya Seton creates Catherine, who I sort of align with Jane Eyre. Catherine is a Jane Eyre type figure. She has a spiritual life. She has this emotional life that at certain parts in her life, I think she ignores, or she lies to herself to sort of live out a life in which with the desires of her heart, but maybe is in some ways killing her spiritual life. And you watch as she grows and has to go through turmoils in order to grow. It was really interesting. And then it's also just a fascinating look at the Plantagenet period. I mean, that is not lost. Some of the highs and lows of that era is really fascinating, and the way that Catherine interacts with some of the ups and downs of both court and illness, outrage, all of that is really, really good and really fascinating. And then just Anya Seton's a great writer. She's a great writer. Fantastic, really great characters, and surprisingly deep. Like, I didn't expect it to be as deep as it was, but in a lot of ways, like Jane Eyre is so much deeper than I think one would think. As you know, Jane Eyre is a coming of age story. This book also, Catherine, is just so much deeper than I thought it was going to be. So for fans, I think, of Jane Eyre, you would really, really enjoy Catherine by Anya Seton. All right, my other classic, tied for top, is My Antonia by Willa Cather. Oh my goodness, so much is good about this. This tells the story, I always forget the name of our narrator, Jim Burden. That's right, Jim. The reason is that he's telling the story. He's not really talking about himself. He's talking about Antonia, who is a crush. She's a neighbor, she's his crush, and I was so surprised by a lot of these, a lot that is in here. It's a quiet novel. It talks about the Nebraskan countryside, which may sound kind of boring, but if you like nature writing like I do, then this has some really beautiful descriptions of nature and just the way the landscape looks. I mean, it is a huge feature in this book, and I love that part of it. But this is also surprisingly deep, and it talks about I don't like loving someone from afar and wondering what happened to them and getting little snippets of what happened to them as your life continues to progress. And like, as Jim lives his life, he never forgets about Antonia. And there is a really touching, like the last section is incredibly touching, touching on nostalgia and memory and the way that we view people. And it was so beautifully handled. It was so beautifully done. The ending really made it for me. I've been noticing how many books cannot land the ending. Like it's just sort of like, it gets weird and odd. And this book, not only did it land the ending, but I wanted to applaud, because for such a quiet, thoughtful novel, the way that it ended really made the book for me. It was so wonderful. And maybe I'm just getting into that time of life where nostalgia and memory are important to me, and I hold them dear. So the way that it was handled in this book really touched me. But overall, just a quiet but really, really, really beautiful novel. All right, now we're going to talk about the 5 more contemporary novels. A lot of these are, less than, they were written from the year 2000 onward. I guess I don't really know. I don't have an order. It's very difficult for me to choose a favorite, but I'll put my favorite, at last. I'll kind of slowly, these, I have 5 books to talk about. 5, 4, 3, and 2. I don't really have an order. They're all kind of competing for 5, 4, 3, and 2, but my number 1 is going to be my number 1 for now, and we'll see how it ages in my memory, but gosh, I just really, 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 really love the book. So the first one is The Last Samurai. So 5, but it could be 5, 4, 3, or 2. It doesn't really matter. The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt. Unfortunately, when I was reading this book, I thought that it had something to do with the Tom Cruise movie about The Last Samurai. And I was like, I don't understand. And it was kind of unfortunate that I had that image in my mind as I was reading through this. Because the movie and this book are not connected at all. There's no connection. So this is about a prodigy, a savant, somebody who is incredibly smart. This little kid named Ludo, and it's about him and his mother and the way that she decides to raise him. He has a talent for acquiring languages, and he doesn't have a father. And some of it is, this journey. He kind of creates this weird hero's journey for himself to establish a father figure for him. And he's working through some of what it means to be a father and what is a good father, and has some of those questions at the forefront. But really what's interesting was that there are all of this, it's such a weird book. It's a weird, odd book, and totally worth the read if you're interested in odd books. But it has there are pages of this book that feel kind of just experimental, like words on a page, a little bit, like I could see what she was doing. But then there are also parts that are narrative, and the narrative was really interesting because every time she got into telling a story, Helen DeWitt could tell a story. Like, this woman can tell a story, and it was really, really interesting. And the way that it all came together was super fascinating. In a lot of ways, it was musings on genius. This is her musings on genius and what it means to be someone who is just an outlier in terms of intelligence in society. And for a kid, also figuring that out, but also trying to figure out who his dad is. It's those two things together, and it's weird and interesting and fantastic. Okay, next up, got through that one. All right, next up, Sarah Waters, The Paying Guests, which, is not actually, it's the title itself sometimes feels like a tongue twister. This is my first Sarah Waters book, and it follows Frances, who is Frances is living in this big old house with her mother, and they are strapped financially. Like, they're trying to figure out what to do in terms of finances. And so what ends up happening is that they end up renting out rooms in their house, and that's not the norm, at least for Frances and her mother, and the way that their financial status has changed. This is totally outside of what Frances and her mother would consider normal. But they end up renting out these rooms to this couple, whom I cannot remember their name, the Barbers, and you should just go into this knowing that the Barbers bring their own je ne sais quoi to the Frances household, and the story takes off from there. There's a lot of, especially at the beginning, there's this musing about this couple, and what are they doing with their time in our house, and then a friendship and maybe something more blossoms between one of the Barbers and Frances, and it is really fantastic. And then it turns into something else, which was also really fantastic, and I feel like she really pulled it off, even though I had some questions as Sarah Waters was trying to pull it off. But at about the halfway mark, the tone and everything switches, and it turns out to be really good and really fascinating and really interesting, and she lands the ending. It was great. It was just fantastic. So next up, we have The Glutton by A.K. Blakemore. Now this A.K. Blakemore, she takes the story of, or this legend about the glutton of Lyon, and it was this figure, this real person that could apparently eat a bunch of stuff, including things that you shouldn't eat. And she takes that and she tries to write what could have this person could have possibly been like. And it's weird. I have read Perfume by Patrick Suskind. This was a Steve Donahue recommended book. And he says that it's like Perfume by Patrick Suskind. And they are very, very similar in a lot of ways, where one is thinking about being such an outlier and an outcast in society, that is it society that creates the monster, or is the monster truly within this person, this glutton of Lyon, and is that just his true nature? And it's a little bit of that push and pull, but it's also like, that is not even the tip of the iceberg. It's weird and it's dark and it's atmospheric and surprisingly touching. I don't know, it has a lot of layers to it, but it's going to be for fans of Perfume, or people who like the weird because it is weird and really an interesting novel. Now, I just read this, so I don't know how it will fade in my memory, how it will be in my memory, or how long it will stick with me. But yeah, really, 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 really good. So the next book is going to be James by Percival Everett. This is going to be from everybody's talking about this book. Everybody likes this book, it seems like. But it is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of James, who is the runaway slave in Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And it is giving focus, giving voice to James. I really, really liked the trick. I don't want to. You'll find out, like in the first couple of chapters, you're gonna find out the trick that James and the other slaves are pulling on the white community that they are owned by, and it's great. And so it feels like a running joke. It feels like a tee hee hee, we're in on it. We, the readers, and James and his community are in on it, you know, versus the other people who are just, the whole thing is brilliant. And I really liked it. It was really entertaining. And actually it read more like a thriller, a fast-paced thriller, wherein you actually end up rooting for the main character more than you thought you would. Like, I ended up sympathizing and rooting for James way more than I thought I would. It was kind of like, I think I went into it thinking like, of course I'll root for him. He's the main character, like, obviously. But the way that my feelings developed for James throughout the novel and really started to, like, it just lit a fire in me that I was like, yes! by the end of the novel, I was like, oh, that was so good! I was really rooting for him. It surprised even me. Like, I was surprised at how much I was rooting for James. Now, the final book, I really just loved this. Now, I have the book. I listened to the Tom Hanks narrated version, which was amazing. I think it would be just as good on the page because of and I think I would feel pretty much basically the same reading it, in which I should probably just read it also, just to make sure that I feel the same. But I have the book. I can highly, highly recommend the Tom Hanks narrated version wherever you can find it. And you all are probably know what I'm talking about once I mentioned Tom Hanks and narrating it, because I mentioned it before. But The Dutch House by Ann Patchett, really, really good. I really like this book. This is my second Ann Patchett. I read Bel Canto. I liked parts of the book, but the ending, did not enjoy it. I've heard some people critique the ending of this book, saying that they didn't really like it, the ending itself. I liked it. I liked the whole thing. I didn't mind the way that she tied it up, even if it was a little, maybe a little, I could see how people could think it was a little weird and outlandish. For me, I didn't mind, because what I liked about this book was that this is telling the story of siblings. It's telling the story of a brother and sister, and the way that their relationship, I don't know, I could maybe because I really love my siblings, and they mean so much to me, and over the years, there are times when you're closer to your siblings, and there are times where, you feel a little further apart. And I don't mean to be emotional, but I thought that was captured so well. And some of the things that only you and your siblings go through that you can remember and touch upon and grow together in, that is so deep rooted in the experiences of childhood and the way that you saw things as a child and the way that I don't know, things played out when you were kids, and the way that you talk about your own childhood and the nostalgia of it all. And it sort of does all of that. It does all of that. And essentially, this brother and sister, they are in a lot of ways not obsessed with, but they have this connection to this house that they grew up in, the Dutch house. And I don't know, the way that this house ends up playing this incredible role in their lives. And it was so good. It was so good. And also, in a weird, I don't know, my parents also live in the same house that I was born in and that all my siblings were born in. And so in a lot of ways, place feels very nostalgic for me. So as they're talking about this connection with the Dutch house, the house that is in the title, not that my own house is anything like this Dutch house, but the way that it was talked about and thought about and sort of fantasize, like became a thing of fantasy in their own minds and in their childhood, and what it became in a lot of ways is how I feel about my own parents' home. And it just really, really touched me. But I think the best part is that there was this strong sense of place with the Dutch house, and also with New York, and there were a couple of main places, but the Dutch house is definitely one of them. And what place can mean and how it can hold a special place in your heart, quite literally, well, figuratively, it can hold a place in your heart, and that it can be this touchstone for a lot of different things. It was about that, and it was also about sibling and family relationships, but mostly about a sibling relationship. And we're getting the perspective of the boy, who I can't even remember, what is his name? Oh yeah, Danny and Maeve. So Danny is the younger brother, and he's quite a few years younger than Maeve, his sister. But you know, you watch the way that their roles flip, how, you know, Maeve ends up watching over Danny, and then there are times where he has to be almost like the older sibling watching after his sister. It was so good. It was so interesting. I really loved it. It was just incredible. And having Tom Hanks read it to me was amazing. Even though I do think that this would absolutely stand up on its own as a read because it's fantastic. But yeah, just and kind of touched on all the things: architecture, art, family, all of it. All of it was great. It just sung, and I loved it. I loved it so much. So yeah, that's it. Tell me your favorite reads this year so far. I would love to know. I'm very curious as to how some of these will age in my memory. Of course, we'll come back and, you know, around the end of the year mark, and I'll figure out what has stuck around as a favorite read and what has faded in my memory. I wonder how that's gonna go. So yeah, but for now, I really, the Dutch house, y'all, it was so good. Okay, that's it. Oh my gosh, I've been filming for ages. I must go. I must go. But yeah, tell me your favorite reads down below. And otherwise, you know, just thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye.